Welcome back to another edition of Dark Matters Radio. Tonight's show has been some time in the making. As a matter of fact, this has been, in essence, one of the most difficult programs that I've put together for some time. I think the reason for that will become apparent as the show goes on, but I've had to go back through my files, through my records, and audio tapes going 20 years into the past. And the reason? Well, back in those days, as many of you know, I was the director of research for UFO Magazine. And at that time, there was no doubt that UFO Magazine was the magazine of record covering the UFO beat. Back in those days, and I'm talking about the late 1980s, the very, very early 1990s, we made our mark by doing a series of extensive behind-the-scenes investigative reports on not only cases in the UFO field, but also individuals making a major, huge flash. Now, tonight's show, we're going to be dealing with a guy that actually, in November of 2001, was killed in a shootout with the police in Ecker, Arizona, and after having shot a police officer in the head. Now, this man's name was William Bill Cooper. And you may be asking yourself, why, after all those years, would I be doing a show on Cooper? Well, recently, and I'm talking about as I do this show the last couple of weeks, my producer, Lan Lamphere, sent me an audio clip that he heard where Cooper was being lauded on the net as being a visionary, someone that basically galvanized the Patriot movement. Now, if you're not familiar with UFOs, if you're not familiar with the Patriot movement, you may be wondering just who in the world was Bill Cooper? Well, for that, we've got to go literally back into the past. Now, this has been a long process, and many of you listening to this show will not have even probably been around back in the mid-1980s, but we've got to go back basically to the dawn of the computer revolution. Oh yeah, computers. Now, circa 1985, the PC, the Apple, the Amiga, whatever your flavor was in those days, basically was a box that was at home. There was no internet as we know it today. Now, sure, there was an internet, but it was primarily concerned and only used mostly by the Department of Defense and college universities. If you bought a computer and you wanted to go online, you had to have a telephone modem. And if you had a telephone modem that allowed you to go online, well, the next thing you had to do was find some place to go. The solution? Bulletin board systems. Now, in 1985, most computer bulletin board systems were primarily concerned with computers and things about computers. But down in Fountain Hills, Arizona, was a guy by the name of Jim Spicer who had a different idea. That idea? Why not do something concerned with not only UFOs, but the weirder side of life, the paranormal, things that were periodically cropping up in the news, like the Mothman, the Lizard Man down in Georgia, UFOs, of course, and Paranet got its start. Now, before it was all said and done, there were Paranet BBSs that literally spanned the globe. I happened to be a part of the Paranet system back in those days. As a matter of fact, I was their security director because there were people even then that tried to hack and crack into Paranet. Now, I got my first computer in 1987. And if I tell you what I had in those days, but when I bought it, I was just happier than could be. And even though in hindsight I recognized how I got taken for a ride, I had a system that allowed me to do quite a bit. Now let me tell you about it. It was a Tandy, also known as Radio Shack computer, a 1000EX system. It had an 8088 CPU. It came stock with 256K of memory, and I put more in there until it reached the whopping total of about 384. I had a dot matrix printer. The computer itself was basically a keyboard with one internal floppy drive that took a 360K 5¼ floppy. But by the time I had it all tricked out in 1987, early 1988, hey, I was going places. And I had a 300 baud modem. Now, if you're not sure what that is, look it up online. You're going to be shocked that I bought from Radio Shack to the tune of about $100. Now, even though there was no internet, there were pay-as-you-go services. And what I'm talking about primarily were services like CompuServe, later Delphi, and several others. I ended up going up on CompuServe with my 300 baud modem, costing me $6.40 an hour. And on one of my journeys up there, I stumbled over something called the Issues Forum. While rooting through there, I came across a number of UFO files, and I came across something else, something called MJ12, which had recently been put there by Bill Moore and Jamie Chandra, the original MJ12 documents. Now, this isn't a show about that, but while I was rooting around, I came across something else called the John Lear hypothesis. Now, John Lear was the son of William Lear of Learjet fame, and he had written a document that was absolutely mind-blowing in its allegations. I'm not going to go into that either, but I was kind of shocked. If you're interested, I'm sure you can still find it online. And I called John up. We spent a couple hours on the phone, and a week or so later, he UPS'd me a huge stack of documents, including a videotape. Now, reading through this stuff, which basically were documents that were supporting his hypothesis, I found out about Paranet. Paranet was the place that John Lear had first uploaded his document through Jim Spicer. I became a user on the Paranet bulletin board system down in Arizona, and things kind of took off. Now, there was a lot of vitriol that was being spewed about even then, not only at Lear's hypothesis, but there were pro-MJ12 proponents, anti-MJ12 proponents. As a matter of fact, it's quite a bit like things are today in the UFO field, where everybody apparently hates everybody. So, along about July, another guy popped up on Paranet. And this guy popped up supporting John Lear initially with 50% of everything he said. This guy's name was William Cooper, Bill Cooper. And things then really began to get interesting. But before I get too wrapped up in all this, let me do this first. I want to play for you that audio clip that Lan sent me a couple of weeks ago to let you know what, at least in some areas today, is being said about Mr. Cooper.
About what's going on in America. They sow the seeds of discontent for the coming time when America is being led towards this path that we believe it's being led to. We believe America is being set up right now. It's being staged for an insurrection.
Now, in just a few of the people that we've mentioned so far in this show, I want to point something out. Most of these hosts owe their existence to a man named William Cooper, who single-handedly blazed a trail which opened up investigations into various causes, including the abusive practices of government, the legality of tax laws within the United States, investigations into UFO phenomena, and the Illuminati higher-level Masonic conspiracy that Cooper, from his inside knowledge as a military intelligence agent, knew existed within the shadow government of the United States. Cooper pretty much single-handedly carved out an entire form of media that became underground shortwave radio that pulled in many of later practitioners, including many cheap imitators that even to this very day continue to masquerade under the banner of being heirs to William Cooper. Cooper's group still continues to operate and put out information in a legitimate. Nevertheless, Bill Cooper paid the ultimate price for it when November 5th, 2001 was engaged in a gun battle with police officers in Ecker, Arizona, and as a result, deputies shot and killed him on his property. These are the seedbeds of the Patriot movement, and Bill Cooper is a figure that looms large. For all his flaws and for even some of the errors that he may have propagated, Bill Cooper opened up an ability for underground radio to truly have some legitimacy and take away some of the stain of what was called, quote, conspiracy theories.
All right, we are back. Now, look, we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, boy, can I promise you a whole lot more. Right here on Dark Matters Radio on the Patriot Brigade Radio Network. Stand by. All right, we are back. Now, in 1988, there was something else that happened that also caused quite a firestorm in not only UFO circles, but that literally spanned the globe. George Knapp, investigative television journalist at KLAS Channel 8 in Las Vegas, ran a series of specials where he talked about a super secret and at that time very little known area as part of the Nellis Range that was called Area 51. Area 51 was an area that was so super secret that nobody had a clue what went on out there. This, however, happens to be one of the places where super secret aircraft were test flown, developed out there. Things like the U-2, going back to the mid to latter 1950s. Later on, the aircraft, the Blackbird, the SR-71. And then he brought somebody on in electronic blackout that he called Dennis, a pseudonym. And this individual claimed to have been a physicist out there that worked on, of all things, recovered alien technology. Oh yeah, crashed flying saucers. Now, talk about creating a firestorm. Later on, Knapp was to do another series of interviews, about a year later, as a matter of fact. But now he identified the individual, a man by the name of Robert Lazar, Bob Lazar. Now, UFO Magazine, of course, was extraordinarily interested in this. And since I knew most of the players down there, by this time I knew John Lear, I certainly knew George Knapp. I later met and discussed, talked to, and interviewed Bob Lazar and Lazar's very good buddy, Gene Huff. We became privy to a lot of information that was not yet then public. Now, of course, there were a lot of people that claimed that Lazar was not the real thing. There were people that alleged that he was a disinformation agent. He was basically a ozone-sniffing sky pilot. But the one thing about Lazar's story that always struck me as something that I couldn't explain was that unlike so many other people in the UFO field, his story never changed. Now, we got to bring another name into the mix at this time. Now, remember, circa 1988, 1989, there were no Art Bells. Art Bell was doing satellite political talk out of his trailer in Pahrump, Nevada. There was no Don Ecker. I did not begin broadcasting until 1991. But there was a guy in Las Vegas, Nevada. His name was Billy Goodman. He had a show called The Billy Goodman Happening. At the time, it was on KVEG. I believe it was 870 in Las Vegas. And after George Knapp's second series on the super secret area known as Area 51, Goodman secured quite a coup by getting Bob Lazar and Gene Huff to come on his program. Now, when all this was happening, off on the wings was John, still extremely active in the UFO field, and up and coming Bill Cooper. Now, when Cooper first surfaced in the summer of 1988, he came on the Paranet Bulletin Board system, claiming that in the mid-1960s he was a sailor that was stationed on board a diesel submarine, the USS Tyru. And along about 1966, Cooper claims that while he was on lookout on the bridge of the submarine, of course the sub was surfaced, he and several other people were shocked by a gigantic, and I'm talking about aircraft carrier-sized UFO that he alleges left the ocean, flew up into the sky through some clouds, and then either it came back or another one almost identical to it came back. In essence, that was the original story that Cooper gave out. However, as time went by, the story began to change. Soon he was talking about having been part of a ultra-secret naval briefing team in SINCPAC fleet in the early 1970s, circa 1972, 1973. And he alleges that while he was part of this briefing team, that he, in fact, was privy to some of the most ultra-top cosmic secret things in American intelligence. And these were to include items like something he later called Operation Majority, which in fact was, in hindsight, a ripoff of Bill Moore's MJ-12 documents that Moore claims to have been privy to. And even later, one of the most corrosive pieces of disinformation to come out of that era of time, involving the John F. Kennedy assassination and allegations that actually it was Kennedy's Secret Service driver that fired the fatal headshot. Now, if you're not familiar with this piece of disinformation propaganda, its genesis actually goes back to this period of time. I've got to mention another name, a man by the name of Lars Hansen. Now, Hansen for years had been a fringe researcher, investigator, looking at some really odd and off-the-wall things. But he became involved in the John F. Kennedy assassination. He was working with a couple of guys in Northern California that had a theory that the driver of JFK's limousine in Dallas on that fateful day of November the 22nd, 1963, was somehow involved in the murder of President Kennedy. Now, they didn't have a lot of money. They were able to secure a very poor copy of the Zapruder film, probably what Hansen later told me was a fourth or fifth generation copy. They got it into a lab. They washed all the Keller out of the Zapruder film because, as you may or may not know, the Zapruder film originally was Kellerized. What they were trying to do was to enhance the contrasts in this poor generational copy of the Zapruder film. And while they were doing all this and putting it together and taking a look at it, for just a sudden split second, it appears as if the driver is sitting there holding a pistol, a handgun. Now, I know this is radio. It's tough to imagine this if you haven't seen that video. I do have a copy of this video, which incidentally is titled Dallas Revisited. But some little known facts about this, if you were around then or if you heard about this later. This video was never, ever to have been in the public arena. When Hansen had this done, and he put some narration on it, basically what he wanted to do was to find some investors to basically finance his and his two friends' research into the JFK assassination. Now, back in those days, there were a lot of people that were banging around the periphery of the JFK murder. People like Bob Groden, David Lifton, incidentally, people that Lars Hansen knew. And then one of the biggest mistakes ever. Hansen had been in Las Vegas, saw a brochure listing a public talk that John Lear, son of aviation genius William Lear, was giving on his UFO research. And Hansen went down there thinking that if he could interest Lear in this, Lear, whom at the time Hansen believed was part of the Lear fortune, might be persuaded to finance his research, not being aware at the time that Bill Lear and John Lear had had a major falling out before Bill Lear's death, and Bill Lear had cut John from the family fortune. Well, he got down there, met Lear, told him who he was, and gave Lear a copy of this tape. Now, things were to get even more interesting, talking about Bill Cooper. All this time, Cooper's story kept increasing in size and scope. Now he was a former intelligence briefer, which incidentally, in 1990, I did an extensive research and expose on Cooper, which is one of the reasons that we're sitting here today talking about this. And I found out that if Cooper had been part of anything having to do with the briefing team, it was in the audio-visual section of it, which meant, in essence, that what he did was carry out the full ashtrays and carry in the pots of coffee. But be that as it may, later I was to talk to a number of people about Cooper's background. One of the people that I interviewed was former Las Vegas Bullet reporter Mr. Tony Pelham. And I interviewed Pelham about Cooper and his story, and this is what Pelham had to say.
Called me on Cooper's second trip up here a couple of years ago to Lear's house. And as you know, you might not know,
You were a reporter for the Las Vegas Bullet.
Weekly tabloid, right. And I saw John doing these lectures. And I said, wait a minute, John, he's a wealthy, intelligent guy. So I went up and introduced myself and said, John, I want to write about this. But I said, either I'm going to write that you're a kook, or I want to retrace everything you've done so I'll understand about the little graves and the underground bases and all that. So I started reading and tracing down leads and got involved with Linda Howe and the mutilated cows. And so one morning John called me and said, hey, I got a guy from the Navy up here. I want you to come up here right away. I went up, introduced myself as Cooper. He talked for about 2 hours and explained his whole story from 1972 when he saw these documents, the briefing team, and so forth. So I went back and I tried to absorb this, and then I started talking with Cooper on the phone. And he gave us this name of Bob Swan. And Lear had been over to Hawaii since then, and he wasn't able to get a hold of this Bob Swan, but he said he was a building contractor over there. I kept calling until I finally got Bob Swan on the phone. And I introduced myself, and Swan concurred. He said, yeah, he says, I was Bill Cooper's closest friend in 72. It was the night of the eve of the wedding. Bill Cooper came to me and said, hey, I've got these documents.
Now, let me ask you a question, Tony. When was this that you spoke to Bob Swan? Do you remember the ballpark date? Because I have a reason for asking this. Because
have you seen Linda Howell's book, The Alien Harvest?
Oh, Linda and I, see, I'm a mutilation researcher myself.
Okay, well, what I was going to say was, it was, as soon as I got a hold of him, it was that following, and I told Linda, and I gave her his phone number, she got a hold of him, and then that letter that Swan sent her, whatever that date is, it would have been about 2 to 3 months prior to that when I talked to him.
So we're talking roughly September, October 1988.
Right. So that's when I talked to Swan. Swan, I was impressed. He was legit. He says, yeah, and he seemed to be a very successful building contractor over there, and he goes from island to island. And so I said, did you know? Yeah, he says, but Bill came to me with these documents. He said he had these documents, and he was talking about the astronauts and the UFOs and that. He says, I can tell you up front, he says, I never accepted any documents. He says, first of all, he says, if Bill had some top secret stuff, he said, as a civilian, I didn't want to have anything to do with, he said, because that's against the law, and he says, I figured our government knew what they were doing. But he said, yeah, the only thing he would talk about, he said, yeah, John said it was talking about there was a base on the other side of the moon and that our astronauts had been followed by UFOs. That was the extent of it. There was none of this Kennedy stuff or any of that stuff. So I said, what did you do? He said, listen, I didn't get any documents. He says, John, Bill never gave me any documents. He said he had some papers there, but he says, I don't even know that I actually looked at them. He says, I just didn't want to be involved in it. He says, but Bill did seem to be very concerned about the whole thing.
Now, wait a minute now, Tony. Let me make sure I get this straight, okay? I want to get this absolutely correct. Bob Swan told you that the only thing he recalled was that Cooper had mentioned something about UFOs following the astronauts up to the moon, and allegedly there was an alien base on the dark side of the moon.
That was the extent of it. No, and I talked to him for about a half an hour on the phone. He says, up front, he says, well, listen, he says, even though Bill's been out of the Navy all these years, he says, I don't even know if I should be talking about it. He says, because he says, couldn't he still get in a lot of trouble about this? I said, well, no, because Bill Cooper is advertising it and trying to tell the world all this stuff. So I said, but we're trying to verify if he's a phony or if any of this stuff actually happened. But so then when I put him in touch with him and Linda Howell in touch, he wrote her this letter that she published in her book. If you read the book very carefully, it doesn't really say any more than what I've said.
No, I as a matter of fact, not only have I read the book, I reviewed the book for UFO Magazine.
Okay, well then you see that still we've seen no documents. Then when I started spending my time with Bill Cooper, and mind you, the reason I maintain the relationship the way I do, and it took me as long as George Knapp had asked me a long time ago to do that interview, and I finally reluctantly did it. I'm not a ufologist. I'm not in any different segment or faction of this thing. I'm a curious person, so I maintained a relationship with Bill Cooper when he put into talking about Fatima, and when this Galileo was launched and they're going to shoot plutonium to them. I go along with all this. I never looked at Bill Cooper and said, Bill, you're full of shit, or I don't believe this. I keep the lines of communication open,
right,
so people will tell me as much as they'll tell me. So when he insisted about the documents, I said, well, Bill, I said, as a reporter, I want to verify all this. He says, well, great. He says, this is what I've been looking for, a reporter, somebody that can verify my background. He gave me that resume of those 6 previous employers. I called all 6 of them up, and I could only verify like 2 of them, and it was like, some little training school or something, like where people go to. In other words, it wasn't like he's a president of some university in California or something. I mean, the people did remember him, and then after I told him I had checked with a couple of schools, he says, "Oh, by the way," he says, "I was never really fired from any job because of my UFO involvement." He says, "But after I did leave, quit, my boss says, Bill, I really wish you hadn't gotten involved in that UFO stuff." But prior to that, he was saying, "Yeah, I've been fired and threatened."
Well, he came out publicly in 1988, and I have this on record from the Paranet Computer Informational System, which I happen to be a part of, Tony, and he was claiming that he was fired and lost a $75,000 a year job because of his UFO disclosures.
That was a lie, because after I checked out that resume, and he knew I was going to the trouble to check these things out, he called me and he says, "Oh, Tony," because apparently one of these previous employers had mentioned that I was checking all this out. And he says, "Oh," he says, "I never was actually fired." He says, he said, "I would have been." He says, "My employer told me after I resigned," he says, "Bill, gosh, I just really wish you hadn't got involved in all this UFO stuff. You would have made a great team," or something like that. So when I hit the point about the documents, I said, "Okay, Bill," I said, "explain to me." I said, "I was in the Marine Corps, and I had security clearance, and I guarded Talos missiles, and I'm a little bit, and I was at Pearl Harbor, and I know a little bit about these things." I said, "Tell me this facility you worked in." Well, it was an office complex there at Pearl Harbor, and he worked the graveyard shift, him and another lieutenant. He was a chief petty officer, E6 or something. He said, "But I was with a lieutenant. Worked the graveyard shift." He said, "What I did after we did this briefing and I saw all these documents and everything, I would wait until the lieutenant would go to lunch on his break. Then I would go over to the file cabinet, open the file cabinet, and I said, this wasn't in a vault, it wasn't under lock and key or anything. You simply open the file cabinet." Right. Open the file cabinet, I would walk over to the Xerox machine, make Xerox copies of all the stuff, and I did this consistently on the night shift, and that's when I would take it out in my lunch pail or whatever. So then he had this stuff. I said, "Okay, great. This is extremely high top, above top secret stuff. Now you've stashed it in a secret place, and you want to make sure that you don't ever lose it, so you give Bob Swan some copies, and surely you ran off some other copies and you stashed them off at Grandma's house in the Louisiana or someplace. You put them in safe places." Well, I'd rather not talk about that, okay? All right, the set that you had, Bill, you've got them somewhere. I need to know, because if you're telling the world about it, when are you going to show it to? He says, "Well," he says, "that's the problem. I was living, I believe it was Anaheim," he said, "we're living there in L.A., and he says, we had a storage garage. It was detached from the house. And he says, in the middle of one night, there was a mysterious fire, and it burned completely to the ground." I said, "Great, no problem." So the documents were destroyed. I said, "Now, Bill," I said, "this is great. As a reporter, just simply give me the address. I'll check with the fire chief." No, I'm not. Too many people have been threatened. Too many people have been hurt. I'm not getting anyone else involved. I said, whoa, wait a minute, Bill. I'm simply going to check a date and an address to verify that there was a fire at that address. End story. No, I don't want to. I'm not going to do it, Tony.
There went the problem. When someone tried to verify this extraordinary story, when someone tried to sit down and figure out what was really going on, suddenly Cooper would clam up. And it was great because it was, in a way, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Later on, of course, as more and more people began to try to check up on this extraordinary story, find out, is this guy for real or not? Suddenly, here we were, all agents of the secret government, trying to destroy Bill Cooper, who was trying to bring the truth to the American people, while he was wrapped up in the American flag and the Constitution of the United States. We're going to take another break. Hang on, we're going to be back in just a moment, and when we do, more of Dark Matters Radio right here, heard only on the Patriots Brigade Radio Network. Of course, there was a lot more going on at that period of time. There were conflict and confusion over the MJ-12 documents, conflict and confusion over the John Lear paper, And of course, that extraordinary story brought to us by George Knapp, investigative reporter from KLAS Channel 8 in Las Vegas, on that mysterious and enigmatic guy, Robert Lazar. Now, in November of 1989, Lazar went on the second series of specials where Knapp was talking about, among other things, Area 51, and Lazar went on using his own face, his own name, and told an extraordinary story about having been hired by EG&G in Las Vegas, which was a government contractor, flown out to Area 51, then bused to an even more secret site called Area S4, where Lazar claimed that he worked on recovered alien technology. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, a flying saucer. Now, this story reverberated literally all across the globe. KLAS received calls from people all across the entire planet wanting to get their hands on a copy of that story. Now, Billy Goodman, radio host for KVEG, was able to secure Lazar to come on his program along with his buddy Gene Huff, where Lazar once again talked about his story. And when Goodman threw open the lines, he started to receive a ton of phone calls. And sooner than later, sure enough, one call came in from Mr. William Bill Cooper, who told the world, hey, I checked this guy out through my intelligence sources, and he's the real McCoy. But why have me tell you about it? Hang on just a second, and I'll have Cooper tell you about it.
How are you feeling tonight?
Well, I'm feeling a little better. As you can hear, my voice still isn't right yet. I apologize to your listeners.
But just don't get too close to the telephone.
Oh, I'm breathing it right through the line. I just want to make a few comments, Billy. I really don't have any questions, but it pertains. I'd like to clear up a couple of misunderstandings here. Number one, I'd like to really thank Bob Lazar for coming forward. I have been talking to him over the last year, along with John Lear. We met in groups and privately, and the man has a wealth of information. I am tickled pink that he's finally decided to come forward and use his real name because it helps all of us. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Bob.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
Number two is that Bob is giving the impression on the air that he's doing this for selfish reasons, and I know better than that. I know that when when I first spoke to him, he was really incensed and enraged that this technology was in our hands and was not being made available to the people, and that there was countless billions of dollars being spent in the normal sector that didn't know anything about this technology to try to develop the technology and come across with a unified field theory and all of these other things, and it was being wasted when it could be devoted to other things that might help humanity and might really help the human race.
Right, I still do feel that way, Bill.
I know you do, and I want the listeners to know that because it's coming across like you're doing this just to protect yourself.
Well, I'm thinking more in the current frame of time.
I understand that, but they don't, Bob, and I want to get this across. You see, Bob wouldn't have to protect himself by doing this if he hadn't been leaking information to John Lear and myself and other people to try to get this information out. And the reason that he's gotten into this predicament is because he's a patriot, he cares about this country, and that's what's made him do this.
That's beautiful, Bill, that you did this. Unsolicited testimonial, basically, is what it comes down to. And you're right. In a way, it was sounding that way. But also, he did, towards the end, mention the fact that he was hoping some of his compadres would come forward, too.
Yes, and that's something else I need to address. But first, I'd like to say that I personally, and also Tony Pelham, and also the Channel 8 news staff, George Knapp, and several other people, John Lear, we have all investigated this man's background thoroughly because we didn't want to be sucked into a trap by the government. And I can tell you that he is who he says he is. He has worked at Los Alamos. He is a physicist. He's a theoretical physicist. He has worked at Area S4 in Groom Lake. We have verified all of this, not just me, but several other people. And I've also verified it by two different sources of mine who are within the government. One works for Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. On the comments about his...
By the way, Bill, not to interrupt you, but I had no idea you guys did that.
Oh, yes, all of us did it, because we're terrified just like you are. And we're always on the lookout for somebody trying to trap us in something that we can be discredited by.
After these series of shows on the Billy Goodman Happening with Bob Lazar, suddenly Goodman hit big all over the western United States. And he had quite a going concern there. Like I said, this was a number of years before Art Bell. This was a number of years before I started broadcasting. And UFOs were still an anomaly on the open airwaves. And remember, there was not an internet like there is today. You could not find this stuff on the net because the net wasn't accessible. So suddenly Goodman hit it big. Now, for some unknown reason, I still am not sure why, KVEG fired Billy Goodman. However, he was soon to get another radio program on the Infotainment Network out of Utah. But in the meantime, this was toward the end of 1989, the beginning of 1990, and things began to change. George Knapp had done or was planning another series of UFO specials. Now, down in Las Vegas, they play hardball. And I'm talking about real hardball. There were a number of other competing television stations that were pretty upset at the huge ratings that Knapp had garnered. So, playing hardball, what these people did was to go out and hire some private investigators. And they began following George Knapp and Bob Lazar around. Now, Lazar is a rather interesting guy. Even today, it's been a number of years since I've spoken to him, but still there are things that periodically pop up about Bob Lazar. During this period of time, Lazar, after he had left his gig at S4, he had taken a number of people out to the Groom Mountains to watch a secret test of one of these objects, whatever they were, regardless of whether they were a genuine flying saucer from outer space or some type of ultra top secret government project. He let John Lear, Gene Huff, and his sister-in-law know that there was going to be a test. At the time, they were testing these secret craft mostly on Wednesday evenings. They all went out there. They saw a test of something darting around the mountains at unbelievable speeds, just a brilliant white blob of light. But when they got all done, later, as they were leaving, they got caught. They got stopped. And as a result, Lazar was busted. Now, he was taken in for a debriefing. He was, according to his own story, threatened at gunpoint. There were a lot of other things that happened. But Knapp was getting all of this on the TV show. And while they're following Knapp and Lazar around, Lazar was privy or knew a madam that had a house of ill repute in Las Vegas. Now, we're talking about Clark County. Now, prostitution is legal in the state of Nevada. However, Clark County, where Las Vegas is situated, it is not legal. And according to Knapp's reporting, Lazar had gone down at the request of this madam and had set up a computer and software and security system for her. So, Knapp found out that they were being followed and that this competing television station was going to run this report on Lazar going to a bordello. Well, Knapp did what any good, quick-thinking journalist would do, convinced Lazar to go on the air and preempt their story, which opened up a whole new can of worms. In the interim, Knapp had also gone to John Lear and several other people, including Cooper, and had interviewed them for his TV show. Now, during the course of this interview, Lear let out a story that I was to cover extensively in UFO magazine about one of his documents known as the O.H. Krill document. Now, you've got to be a little familiar with the UFO history in this country to know where this originally came from. But back in the late 50s, Navy intelligence got their hands on what turned out to be probably one of the first channelers, a woman back east who claimed that she was in mental contact with an extraterrestrial being that she called Krill, Cryll. Later on, when John Lear was putting his paper together, along with another guy by the name of John Grace, another UFO researcher who at that time was still active duty Air Force, put together a document called the O.H. Krill document. The name Krill was kind of an inside joke about this early 1950s entity case, and the OH they pulled out of thin air. However, Bill Cooper was claiming that he read this document, the same document that John Grace and John Lear had just written a year or so before, in his secret Navy files back in the about 1972-73. Well, of course, that was patently impossible. Impossible. And Knapp pointed out this inconsistency on his TV show. Now, Cooper immediately went on the attack. He attacked Knapp, he attacked Lear, he attacked Lazar, and claimed that Bob Lazar had been arrested for having a drug lab. Now, anybody that knows Lazar knows that Lazar dabbled in jet cars, and he had a lab where he worked on these jet engines that he called his speed lab. Cooper took this speed lab reference and turned it into drug dealing. His modus operandi has always been, if you try to hurt me, I'm gonna hurt you first. And this is when I became involved, because quite frankly, I knew all these people. I had been watching Cooper. I had been watching the way Cooper's story had changed over a period of time. And I was one of the first people that was in contact with him when he first came out of the woodwork in the summer of 1988. Well, things were about to get a whole lot nastier. After I began doing my investigation, I started to interview a lot of the principals in this case. And of course, one of the first people that I interviewed was Bob Lazar. And Bob Lazar had some very interesting things to say about Milton William Cooper. So instead of me telling you about it, why don't I just have Lazar tell you about it?
The thing that I found so amazing is that John Lear was basically the reason that Cooper ever received any notice in the UFO field at all.
Right.
And he really took him in, he befriended him, he gave him God knows how much information.
Oh, I know. I was there the one time when I think it was one of the first times Cooper came over. We sat down, and Cooper was just awestruck over what John Lear was saying. And, I basically asked John, who is this guy? And he said, he's okay. And I went on and told John some things. And Cooper said, I'll tell you one thing, you guys know a hell of a lot more than I do. And, that's a quote directly out of Cooper's mouth. And now Cooper knows all, and I don't know what Cooper really did, what his involvement was, but
As far as going back to 1972, 73?
Yeah, who knows? I don't know.
Well, I've got a hell of a lot of information.
So, this was another inclination that a lot of this appeared to be made up on the spot. Now, the other thing that Cooper was really pushing then was the JFK assassination tape. Now, remember that in this tape, which was originally made by Lars Hansen, and it was never meant for public dissemination, Hansen had given a copy of this to Lear, thinking that Lear might be able to help finance his research. Cooper appropriated that. Suddenly, Cooper was claiming that he read in his top secret Navy files back in 1972, 1973, that the limousine driver had actually been the person to fire the fatal headshot into JFK. Now, originally on this tape, Cooper claimed that what the Secret Service agent was shooting was a .45 caliber handgun. Now, I'm quite familiar with firearms, with weapons, not only from my military service, but from my law enforcement service. And I'm here to tell you that if you have never fired a .45 automatic or seen one fired, it has extensive muzzle blast. Believe me, you can't miss it. But it's obvious on this videotape that there is no muzzle blast, which in hindsight makes sense because there's no gun. But when that became obvious to Cooper, suddenly Cooper started claiming that this was a secret CIA air gun firing a pellet loaded with shellfish toxin. Now, when Hansen discovered that Cooper was starting to hawk this at every venue he could for $25 and $30 a pop to buy a copy of this tape, he tried to get Cooper to stop. Cooper absolutely refused. I mean, when you talk about blatant, one thing you can't take away from William Cooper, he was the most blatant BS artist I have ever run into. But there was a radio host out here in Los Angeles at the time by the name of Tom Likas. And right before a major presentation that Cooper gave at Hollywood High School, Lars Hansen went on the Tom Likas show with Bill Cooper and debated him. And just to give you an idea of how Cooper handled these type of things, well, I'll have Lars Hansen and Cooper show you.
Look, mister, I wasn't pushing this to the public. This was to get support and assistance from other researchers and from investors.
This thing is discredited on its face. You talk about...
Well, fine. That's why I'm not promoting it. That's why I'm not promoting it. That's why I haven't been promoting it.
Well, then,
I mean, you know, what kind of argument...
Fraud, because you're putting out a piece of garbage, and now you're backtracking. Sir, you put out a piece of black and white nonsense.
Hey, look, we've already heard that, pal. I didn't put it out. I gave poor quality copies. That's all I had to work with at the time. The reason I made it was to get some backup and support. That's why I got in touch with Greitz, hoping that some of his associates, like Ross Perot, might be able to fund my getting hold of an excellent quality copy and having it digitally analyzed. That was the reason the thing was produced. If you did any research, you might have known that. That's why I haven't been promoting it or pushing it to the public. Okay?
Well,
Cooper's the guy that's doing it.
Here's another discrepancy there, because you got that copy you had directly from Grodin, who, according to you, has the best copy in the world.
I did
you
not
told me that yourself.
No, I did not,
Oh,
Bill.
yes, you
I
did.
got that copy, an 8
Oh,
millimeter.
yes,
I have
you
the
did.
man who gave it to me, a Super 8 millimeter copy from David Evans, okay, in Northern California.
You told me you got your copy directly from Bob Grodin.
No,
and Bob
I did
Grodin
not.
is the man you cite as your hero and the best researcher and expert on the field.
He knows
the
a lot
man
more
who
about it than
lied
you
to
do.
the Senate committee about William Greer not taking his hands off the wheel, which people are going to be able to see on August the 19th at Hollywood High School, I guarantee you. And they'll make up their own mind. And when they see that, your credibility is going to be down in the bottom of the pit.
Bill, my whole point was to get to the truth about the issue of who
We're going to get to it, but the people are going to decide the truth, not you, Lars Hansen.
Okay,
They're going to see for themselves.
I'm not trying to stop it, Bill. Long before...
Oh, yes, you are. You're doing everything you can to stop it, but you won't. The American people are going to see that film, and they're going to know who killed their president.
Long before you ever latched onto this subject, Bill, I made the tape and began the research. A year before you went public and said you saw it in the documents, I had already researched it and contacted people like Colonel Bogarts and John Lear.
And we're telling people that William Greer shot President Kennedy, and now you're backpedaling and saying somebody proved that he didn't. Show us the proof.
No,
Where's the proof that Greer didn't shoot the president?
Well, it's on.
You've said right here that it's been proven. Show us the proof. Where's the proof?
How am I going to show you?
You're trying to keep the American people from knowing who shot the president. You said it yourself.
That's BS.
Tom, did he say it or not? He said it was proven that Greer didn't shoot the president.
What I am trying to do is get people to understand that that tape does does not constitute absolute proof. Okay?
All right, we'll continue this conversation.
Notice the bully boy tactics, the screaming over Hansen. I knew back in those days that this was a discredited piece of video footage. Here's the bottom line story on what people were actually seeing, and it wasn't a gun. You got to remember the time that this video or this film was shot. Dallas, Texas, November 1963. And what did men use on their hair? Well, that greasy kid stuff like Brill Cream. And the bottom line was when they washed the Keller out of the film, there was a reflection off of the Secret Service driver's head, or the Secret Service passenger's head, and it's literally just a split second that it does in fact look like there's an object pointing at Kennedy. And as it turns out, this was the exact moment that Kennedy was in fact shot in the head. Probably, my own opinion now, probably from the grassy knoll. Look, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, a whole lot more, because now I'm going to be talking about the first of two-part expose that I did on Milton William Cooper right here on Dark Matters Radio on the Patriots Brigade Radio Network. Welcome back to Dark Matters. Okay. Now, you had in the last segment just a small taste that Cooper could become loud, verbally violent, but here was the other thing that he was doing, and he did it the entire time I knew him. He drank alcohol to excess. As he later told a couple of people he was in business with, Hollywood movie star Michael Callan and Callan's best friend, who was an old-time Hollywood executive by the name of Doug Dean, he would drink a bottle of Chivas Regal nightly, or at least every other night. He was so concerned about the secret government coming to get him. Now, Callan and Dean had heard Cooper back on the early days of the Billy Goodman happening. Doug Dean had had an interest in UFOs for many, many years. So he got together with Michael Callan. They approached Cooper and said, look, we could package you in the show business way and get your message out there in a big way. Are you interested? Well, of course, Cooper was. He signed the contract, and they did a huge show for him at the Showboat Hotel in Las Vegas, and it was something that Goodman extensively promoted. Now, there's a lot to this story, and Doug Dean and Michael Callan are going to pop up a little bit later. But in the meantime, I had started doing my investigation on this guy to try to figure out if he was real or not. And one of the people that I talked to once again was Robert Lazar. And Lazar told me that, hey, this guy had a potential to be violent. And I said, what do you mean violent? Are you talking about physical violence? Well, this is what Lazar had to say.
Someone really needs to do that because he is absolutely... The unfortunate thing is he's an intelligent man. From the couple times that I've met him, I've seen that he writes well, he comes across well, and he's very believable. And that's really unfortunate because I hate to call someone a psychopath, but he's really crazy. I mean, he comes out with the most... of course, unless he knows exactly what he's doing, and he doesn't believe it. But it really seems like many of the things he writes about, he honestly believes to the point where he'll fight about them and get violent.
You mean physically violent?
Physically violent.
With whom?
John Lear. Well, I walked in on the middle of something, and Cooper sitting there.
About it.
Okay. I just walked in with my sister-in-law one time, and Cooper was sitting there talking to John. And who was kind of upset about something being printed or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is. I don't know. After a brief time talking with Cooper, he got up and started screaming and throwing shit around, and he was a lunatic in no time at all. Granted, he was drinking a lot, and there again, both times I met him, he always has some liquor connected to him, not beer or something like that, but always drinking some sort of hard liquor. So I've never seen him in a completely sober state.
And I had some dealings with Cooper when he was liquored up. Here was a guy that when he felt you wronged him, would wait until the middle of the night, start drinking. The more he drank, the angrier he'd get, and he would start leaving phone messages on your answering machine. Now, of course, the guy who really was instrumental in bringing Cooper out to the public initially was none other than John Lear. Lear was the guy that had the first real dealings with him through the old Paranet system. But I'll let Lear tell you about it.
I became interested in UFOs. Prior to that time, although I'd heard about them and heard many stories, I didn't have a personal interest in it. A friend of mine who was a Raven, those were the U.S. pilots that flew directly for the U.S. ambassador in Laos. One of them, who I had known fairly well over there, retired and came to Nellis Air Force Base in 1985. He called up, came over, and we were starting to talk about old times. When he mentioned, I asked him where all he'd been based since I'd last seen him, and one of the bases he mentioned was Bentwaters. Bentwaters is a United States Air Force base about 70 miles north of London. And being familiar with some of the UFO stories, I said, oh, that's where that UFO supposedly landed in 1980, and the three aliens walked up to General Gordon Williams, the wing commander. And Greg said, no, not supposedly, John. It happened. I was there. I did not see it because I was confined to quarters, but I got the whole story in the stand-up briefing the Monday after that weekend. So I turned to Greg and I said, what do you mean? This stuff is all true? There are saucers and aliens? He said, oh, yeah. And I got to thinking, boy, there's been a lot going on that I don't know about. And the bottom line of which is I found that, yes, they do exist, and things are going on in this country that the public has absolutely no idea. The most important thing is that there is a secret government. It is called MJ-12. I have 5 very good sources for that information, one of which is probably the most respected U.S. general. He is currently still alive, but been retired for many years, who said that MJ-12 did exist, but he could not tell me any more about it. As soon as this general passes on, which should be in the next 2 or 3 years, unfortunately because of his ill health, I will reveal his name. In 1987, I was working a computer network called Pyranet in Phoenix, Arizona, out of my home in Las Vegas, and making certain statements about aliens and the secret government, to which I was the subject of a great deal of ridicule. On the computer board came a person named Bill Cooper, who made the statement that while I cannot back up all of Lear's allegations, I can certainly back up at least 50% of them, because I was aware of this information while with the Navy in 1972.
John, just to clarify,
The summer of '88 that I was working that computer network out of Phoenix, and Bill Cooper had come online and said, well, I can't verify all of Lear's information, at least 50% of it is true, based on my involvement with the subject in the Navy in 1972. When Bill began to support me, I began sending him information and copies of documents which I had. Specifically, in August or September, I sent him a Federal Express package which contained a copy of literally everything that I had gotten as far as information on UFOs and the secret government. I sent him a number of tapes. There might have been 3 or 4 of videotapes containing video programs such as the 1985 CNN broadcast of the Bentwaters incident, UFOs past, present, and future, that was produced in cooperation with the Pentagon by Sandler Films, and a number of other films. In this package was the President Kennedy tape, the Zapruder film, or a copy of the Zapruder film, which I had obtained from Lars Hansen. So that would have been September or October of 1988. When I sent that to Bill, I don't recall exactly what he said about the theory that Greer shot the president, other than to say that it was interesting. The first time that I heard Bill really come out and say anything definitive about that particular sequence was in an April or May show called On the Record with George Knapp here in Las Vegas, in which George Knapp, in which I showed the tape and made the allegation that it was a possibility that Greer shot the president. George turned to Bill and said, did you hear anything about this when you were in the Navy? Bill Cooper said, no, I didn't hear anything about it. I read about it, and I was startled because I had never heard Bill say anything so positive about the Greer shooting, and that was the first time I'd heard him come out so positive about it.
Well, as it appears, as things would pop up, Cooper appropriated them. I saw him do this time and time again. And he was getting more and more airtime on the Billy Goodman happening. Now, remember, earlier in the show, one of the names that popped up in connection with checking out Bill Cooper was former Las Vegas Bullet reporter Tony Pelham. Now, while I was interviewing Tony, the subject of Billy Goodman and his radio show popped up. Tony told me about a time that Goodman had called him up because, according to Bill Cooper, what Cooper told Goodman, Pelham could verify everything that he had to say about his background. But why have me tell you about it? I'll have Pelham tell you.
But the guy's not, he's fairly sharp, because I know he's making a living out of this thing. I mean, he's making some money somehow, isn't he?
Oh, my God, yeah, he's making money.
Showboat, he'd come up here and...
Yeah, what, 700 people were up there?
Goodman called me right before that, I don't know if Bill had told him, but Billy Goodman didn't remember me when he was trying to sell me on Elvis is Alive and Well a few years ago in Vegas. And he says, "Oh, I need you to go on to my talk show tonight." He said, "I understand you can verify Bill Cooper." And I started telling him basically like what I've been saying. "Oh, no. No, well, we believe Bill Cooper. We can't have you on the show."
Well, the bottom line was Goodman saw Cooper as a big draw to his radio show. And, of course, what do radio shows do? They sell advertising. No big surprise. So, later on that summer of 1990, part 1 of my expose ran in UFO magazine. The volume was volume 5, issue number 4. A month and a half after that, the second part of my expose on Cooper ran in volume 5, number 5. Now, immediately upon part 1 running, we received one day a certified letter. I looked at the letter. On the letter was a name I had never seen before, so I opened the letter up, signed for it, opened it up, and it was a letter from Bill Cooper demanding that we retract everything, or his lawyer is going to file suit on a contingency basis. I have nothing to lose. Go for it. Well, we answered that letter in the pages of UFO magazine and said, well, you know, the best defense against libel is the truth. And we are backing up everything that was in that article. So if you want to sue, buddy, you're just going to have to sue. Well, that was the last we ever heard of it. But Cooper, in the interim, had begun publishing a small newsletter called the Cadgy Newsletter. And suddenly, along with George Knapp, John Lear, Bob Lazar, Whitley Strieber, Stanton Friedman, Bill Moore, Jamie Chandra, we were now being named as secret agents of the secret government. Well, this is all part and parcel of the publishing game. You can't please everybody. So part 2 ran. Along comes September 1990. And on the evening of September the 26th and the early morning hours of September 27th, I got a phone call. It was late at night. I hadn't gone to bed yet, but I was watching TV or something. I answered the phone. Hello? It was somebody I knew, and they said, Don, are you listening to Billy Goodman? And I said, no. Why? Bill Cooper is on there, and boy, is he tearing you and Vicky up. So I said, okay, thanks. So I turned on the radio, and sure enough, Cooper was on there, and he was tearing us up. But look, before we get into that part of the story, we're going to take another little break, and when we come back, more of Dark Matters Radio on the Patriots Brigade Radio Network. This is the Bill Cooper story. Welcome back to Dark Matters Radio. Now, later on, a friend of mine sent me an audio tape of the entire show because, quite frankly, I came in the latter part of the show, like an hour before it was going off the air. I reviewed the tape, of course, and for years it's been sitting in my records. But when I was getting ready to do this show, I went through literally dozens and dozens of audio tapes looking for the appropriate quotes that I needed for this story. And finally I came across this. Now, in retrospect, this particular confrontation on the radio became almost legendary back in those days. But Billy Goodman had found a meal ticket in Milton William Cooper. Cooper would come on, make these wild, fantastic claims, and people loved it. They ate it up. Of course, that's always been a problem with the UFO field. People want to believe. They want to believe in lieu of doing actual research to find out what the real facts are. But that's just for another day. Let me play some of this this Billy Goodman show, and you can have an idea of what was happening here. All right, here we go. Billy Goodman.
The spiritual happening anywhere in the entire universe. And as the theme song says, we'll be talking UFOs and conspiracies and much, much more with our guest upcoming very, very shortly. Our guest will be Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper, who believes we're heading for a one-world government. Bill Cooper, who had the privilege of looking at some top-secret papers at one time. Bill Cooper, the very same man that saw a UFO coming up out of the water, hovering above a huge ship out in the middle of Midway. And a bunch of other people saw it but denied it, but he says he saw it and he does not deny it. Bill Cooper, a man who has been attacked by just about every member of the UFO community, but a man who stands up for what he has been saying right along. And Bill Cooper is a man that has been telling a story, and a story that sometimes is hard to believe. But if he's telling the truth, he is the only man that has come forth to tell the truth, because everybody else in the UFO community and in the conspiracy end of things is calling this man a liar and a total fraud. You're going to hear his side of the story. He's a man that's been challenged from all different sides, and he's come out on top every single time. He's a man that's been in the ring a number of times, literally in the ring a number of times, and he's a man that'll be joining us right after this word.
Oh, yeah. There he is, Bill Cooper, all-American hero. When he says that he's been in the ring, that's kind of funny, too, because on a number of occasions, several occasions, at various UFO conferences, before Cooper basically burned all his bridges in the UFO field, he had gotten, shall we say, liquored up just a bit, and would get in arguments. One particular case happened down in San Diego back in the early 90s, where he literally got in a fist fight with another guy by the name of Eric Beckyard. Oh yes, this Cooper was quite a character, but his main raison d'etre was the Zapruder film. By now, most of the UFO stuff he was kind of hedging on. Well, maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but the one thing that he would go to the mats on was the driver of JFK's limousine was the murderer. Same show, Billy Goodman, the night of September 26, talking about the Zapruder film.
Does John Lear work for the CIA?
John Lear has worked for the CIA all of his life.
Okay. I talked to a guy who's been researching the JFK assassination for 15 years, and the 18 people killed, he told me that only one of those was actually there, and he died in a car accident on the way to give some information to a lawyer, but the other people were only involved in the investigation from what he told me.
Well, there were 18 people that were involved with the Kennedy assassination, either there as witnesses or involved in it in some way, directly. And I mean directly enough that the police really needed these people as witnesses. And they were killed within 2 years. Now, about a year or two after that, and it wasn't very long, over 200 people who had been connected with the assassination have died in mysterious ways. I mean, the odds against this stuff is absolutely incredible against it ever happening ever. You know that right now, over 200 people connected to the Kennedy assassination are all dead? Right this very moment?
Yeah, that's amazing. I borrowed an 8mm copy of the Zapruder film, and I looked at it with a handheld microfiche reader, and at first I thought it was a gun, but I think Bo Grice is correct, and what looks like the barrel, I think it's the reflection of the guy's head, and if it was a barrel, it's pointed above his head.
Well, in the first place, it's not a normal gun like you're used to looking at. I think if you've heard me speak, I don't know if you have or not.
Yeah.
It's a pistol that was developed by the CIA for assassination attempts at close range. It's electrically operated, gas-powered. It fires an exploding pellet, not a regular lead bullet. And it doesn't use a powder charge. It uses a gas, like a pneumatic pistol. I don't really know what the shape of the thing is, although there is a very famous photograph of Barry Goldwater holding the thing at one of the Senate hearings, I believe in 1976, the Senate Select Committee on Assassinations. And it is very difficult to make out what it is that Greer is holding in the film. But it is not a reflection on the top of Kellerman's head, I can guarantee you. And you can see the end of the barrel sticking out past Kellerman's head in the back. And you can also see Greer bring the pistol up across his chest and over his shoulder before part of it disappears behind Kellerman's head. And you can also see him take it back down across his chest. Now, Greer testified that he never turned around. The so-called expert on the Kennedy assassination, Bob Groden, who was hired as the photographic expert, the man who has no degrees in photography, has no experience in photography whatsoever, told the Senate Select Committee on Assassinations that Greer never turned around either. I guarantee anybody that watches that film can see Greer turn around.
All right, Gary, thank you for your call this morning.
So, there we have it once again. Now, Goodman, well, who knows what Goodman believed? But at this period of time, now it's been a year or more that Lars Hansen, among other people, have been out there trying to dissuade this notion that somehow the Secret Service agent driving Kennedy's limousine was actually the executioner of JFK. Somebody called up another caller into Goodman's show, and Goodman apparently, well, say he was a little upset at this. I'll let Goodman tell you all about it.
Above his shoulder, and I say something because, like you say, it's not a gun per se or a weapon we're used to seeing, and something does happen there.
That's right.
Bill, why do you think it is that people are coming forward saying that that's not actually happening right now?
Well, I don't know. I think people got cold feet. I think the person that originally made the film maybe made it and tossed it out to see what the public reaction would be to the truth, but they didn't count on me coming along. They didn't count on me having seen documents when I was with Naval Intelligence that said that Greer is the one who shot the president in the head. So nobody can make me back down. I know who did it.
Yeah.
And I was looking for the film for 16 years. And finally I was in a conversation with John Lear one night on the phone, and I told him what I'd seen in these documents, and he said, "Would you like to see the film?" I said, "You're kidding me. I've been looking for that film for 16 years.
Yeah.
And so I got the film.
Well, not according to John Lear, which you heard a little bit ago. Cooper never mentioned anything about this until he was on that program On the Record with George Knapp. Now, by this time, with my Part 1 expose in UFO Magazine having come out and my Part 2 just coming out, and a number of very prominent people within the UFO field all asking questions about Cooper, he was beginning to feel more and more isolated. There's no doubt by this time that a lot of people had heard that there were questions about Milton William Cooper. Now, this was something that Goodman addressed, especially on this particular show, because by now it was common knowledge that Cooper had made a number of serious gaffes that came back to haunt him. This is how he responded.
Question, hopefully you'll answer it for us. Why is it that members of the UFO community are calling you a fraud and a liar and really coming after you and trying to stop you on your quest?
Well, it's not really the members of the UFO community, Billy. It's the leaders of the UFO community, and it's not all of the leaders either, because some of the leaders are staunch supporters. The ones that I have identified as working for the government, putting out false information, and the ones that I have identified that are working in this program to create an alien enemy, to convince the people that we're under a threat of an alien attack, those are the people who are coming against me, and they're coming against me for a very good reason. Because if I turn out to be right, they're dead ducks.
Okay, so he took
North
some
Hollywood,
more calls.
California, and there's Chris. Good morning, Chris.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm wondering why Mr. Cooper doesn't name the people who support him. From what I've been reading lately, some of the strongholds of the leaders of the community, UFO community, including Virgil Armstrong, Jim Beebe, Bill Hamilton, Bandini, DeMar, Dennett, Lars Hansen. These people themselves have been putting the facts as the way they see it. It's very much against your presentation of being original and being authentic. As far as your ethics go, they don't seem to think too much of that. And I think this extends to MUFON too. People, how can you comment about that?
Well, certainly, I'll be happy to comment about it. The people that you're naming, for instance, Virgil Armstrong has been affiliated with the CIA most of his life. He was an intelligence officer in the service.
Weren't you in the intelligence in the service?
I was. That's right. But I was never with the CIA, and I also was not an officer. You understand?
Well, I don't know.
There's a big difference, and for people in the military, they know what that difference is. You see, there's rules and regulations that says you can't talk about this stuff. You can't talk about it, okay? Now, an officer is held to that until his dying day, because an officer is never really out, even though he retires. An officer can be called back at any time. He's still an officer. The fact that Virgil Armstrong is talking about this stuff and nothing has happened to his pension, nothing is happening to him at all, tells me that Virgil Armstrong is talking about it because someone has told him to talk about it.
What about Don Ecker?
Gentlemen?
Well, now a name came up that Cooper was not too happy to hear. That was my name. Now, this is when he started his attacks, and later, a little bit later after this, in real time, is when I got the telephone call telling me to tune in. But this is Cooper's response.
Those are local numbers for you folks in the Utah area, obviously. Now let's go back to Bill Cooper and Chris in North Hollywood.
Yeah, the question was that in the UFO magazine, the volume 5, number 4, which was last month's issue, one of the editors, I believe, or writers for that magazine, stated a story about Don Eckert in his focus on you, Bill Cooper, and what he had to say was pretty much disseminated any of your credibility. And the follow-up issue, some of the bigger names in the UFO community, as you say, returned their acknowledgments as to verifying this. It doesn't seem like your credibility is holding up unless it's just through this magazine of these few people.
Let me ask
you wouldn't mention the people who did stand by you.
Have you ever been to one of my talks?
No, I haven't. I've heard lectures that you've given.
Until you've been to one of my talks, you don't know anything about my credibility. You just
I'm
know
not stating
what
that.
people are telling you.
These other people seem to know about that, and that's what I'm asking for.
No, they don't. What they're doing is they're writing their opinion.
Well, that's so the opinions that I'm stating is that is they don't think too much of you. And
what I'm trying to tell you is if you're basing your opinion on them instead of finding out for yourself.
I haven't given you my opinion, sir. I've given you what they have said roughly, and the answers that they've gotten from that initial story. So, I mean, don't attack me, attack them.
I'm not attacking you. I made a statement. Let me tell you about what happened with UFO Magazine so that you'll get the credibility where it belongs.
Please, thank you.
In issue number 5 of my newsletter, I put out a newsletter. In issue number 5, I tied a connection with Vicky Cooper, who is the editor of UFO Magazine, directly to the CIA. I published this in my newsletter, and in my newsletter I said, because I've published this, I'm going to be attacked by UFO Magazine. A sure thing, the very next issue, they devoted a good portion of their magazine to attacking me.
Now, I got to stop for just a second before we go on with that. You probably weren't there, and if you were around and you were interested at the time, I'm sure that this would have slipped out of your mind years ago. But what the man just said was an absolute bald-faced lie. We never, number one, we didn't attack him. What we did was point out the inconsistency after inconsistency and his outright plagiarisms and his outright lying about various aspects of his story. And if you remember back a little bit ago, I mentioned the O.H. Krill document that Cooper claimed he saw in 1972-73, which would have been virtually absolutely impossible because it had not even been written until about 1987, 1988 by John Lear and John Grace. But what this guy did was appropriate things into his story as time went along. Now, UFO Magazine in 1980, well, when it started in 1986, 1987, anybody that was aware of the publication would have laughed at the assertion that we were begun by the CIA as a tool to disinform the UFO community. There were, at tops at that time, 3 people, myself, Vicky, and Vicky's partner, Sherry Stark, doing this magazine. I mean, this is just outlandish. But anyway, let's go back and hear this maniac.
Previously in their magazine, they had never once written anything about me or anything that I have ever said. In the attack, they never wrote anything that I'm trying to get across to the American people. They just attempted a character assassination.
Now, this is the attack on Vicky.
She has made statements to many, many people that she doesn't believe in UFOs. She has made statements to many, many people, and I can prove that in writing, that her magazine is controlled by the CIA. She's made statements to many, many people that all of the leaders in the UFO field are government agents. She has no interest whatsoever in UFOs. She publishes articles that supposedly give out official government information that's been leaked, but it's always printed under an assumed name, and I think the name is Nielsen. All kinds of weird things with that magazine, but there is a definite CIA connection with Vicky Cooper and UFO Magazine to the CIA.
So, there you have it from Bill Cooper himself. Hey, we're going to take another quick break. Then we're going to come back and pretty much finish this up, because the best part is yet to come, because I call in and get on the show. So stick around. You're listening to Dark Matters Radio right here on the Patriots Brigade Radio Network. Okay, we are back. Now, in the last part, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that I was at home minding my own business late at night on the evening of September 26th and the early morning hours, September 27th, 1990. I get a phone call, and somebody says, "Don, have you been listening to the Billy Goodman Show?" And I said, "No." So I ended up tuning in, and I heard Mr. Cooper. Well, immediately, I grabbed my trusty telephone. I knew Goodman's call-in number, and I began calling in. And sure enough, lo and behold, I got his producer on the phone. And I told him, I said, "Hey, guy, this is Don Ecker from UFO Magazine. Now, I understand my name's been bandied about quite a bit this evening. So here's Billy's choice. He can put me on the air right now, or tomorrow morning, our attorneys will be giving Billy a call." Well, needless to say, the producer went in, told Billy I was on the show, that I was on the phone, and sure enough, he told the audience, and then he started pumping it for the classic showdown. Right here on the Billy Goodman Happening.
You're saying that's Don from UFO Magazine, Roger? My producer says that Don Eckert from UFO Magazine has called in. He is on a line, and he'd love to address you this morning. I think it's only fair that you should know that ahead of time. Are you ready for him?
I'm always ready for Mr. Pecker.
No, Mr. Eckert. Mr. Eckert. Easy, Bill. We're on national radio here.
You can see what a classy guy Cooper was.
Hey, I can't be easy. That man's an enemy.
But you can't.
I chop enemies to pieces.
I know, but you can't say things like that on the radio. Yeah, you affect our situation.
Anything wrong, Billy?
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh.
And there we go. Billy Goodman, the buffoon, and Cooper's shill. His meal ticket. Come on.
Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I misinterpreted what you said and the double entendre meaning or something. I'm not quite sure myself.
Oh yeah. So anyway, we get on the show, and Billy brings me on the air. Boy, I had a lot to say. I didn't have all that much time to say it, so I wanted to make sure that those things that I did have to say, I got out. Because here's a little something that you're not aware of, but prior to Goodman being fired from his gig at KVEG, when he was still down in Las Vegas, before he started doing a show which was based out of Utah, Cooper had come on there when our first part 1 of the expose ran and really attacked us. I had called Goodman up, and I got him on the phone. And I demanded to come on the air and debate Cooper. Now, this is going to be important because later on, this little fact is going to pop up. And lo and behold, Goodman said he was going to bring me on so I could debate Cooper out of Vegas, and he got fired from his gig. So now, we're in Utah, okay? Or it's coming out of Utah. And here was me coming on the air.
Saying many things over the years, and now Don Eckert has done some research and some investigations, and he's claiming that Bill Cooper is a fraud and a liar. And Bill Cooper is ready to defend himself and to say exactly what he thinks of Don Eckert and back and forth, so you don't want to miss it. It will be an interesting exchange. Don Eckert, good morning, gentlemen.
Yeah, good morning, Billy. How you doing?
I'm doing quite all right. How about yourself, sir?
I'm doing fine. First off, I would like to say that I hope that I'm going to be able to make my statement without either being interrupted by Mr. Cooper or yourself. The last couple of times that I've been on the air with Cooper, it seems like I always get cut off before I have a chance to say what I have to say.
Okay.
Poor little thing.
Okay, how much time do you need, Don, and we'll let you go for it.
Well, I'd like to have at least 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, and then we'll let Bill Cooper respond for that, and then we'll take a break. Go for it.
Okay, number one, we started doing an investigation on Cooper back in April of this year when he came out with one of his cadgy newsletters
slandering a number of people in the field, to and include John Lear and Bob Lazar. Now, Bob Lazar, as some of your listeners I'm sure are aware, is purportedly a physicist that had been employed at a super-secret government installation at Nellis Air Force Base at Area 51S4. Now, according to the information that came out at that time, and as a matter of fact, Lazar had been a guest on your happening when you were broadcasting out of Las Vegas. Lazar had been, of course, put under scrutiny any number of times, and he himself, in fact, did not help his case because he was not willing to come forth with information that would substantiate a lot of what he's saying. Howsoever, not quite a year ago, on November the 21st of 1989, while Lazar was a guest on your program at that point, Cooper came on the air and gave him a glowing testimonial. Now, not only do I have that on a tape that I received from somebody that was making tapes for the happening, Roger the Dodger, but I also quoted that verbatim in the second part of the Whistleblower series. Now, we gave Cooper, to address a number of points that he had made, we gave Cooper two chances. The first part that came out and the second part that recently came out a number of weeks ago, to answer any of the charges that were made in the magazine. Cooper has never, ever contacted us with any information or anything to refute any of the allegations on the investigation that I made on him. Now, we did receive one letter from Cooper. Actually, he had the name of his wife on the return address. I think he was afraid that we wouldn't sign for it if we saw Cooper's name on it, a registered letter that stated that if we did not do a complete, full retraction on our Part 1 story on the whistleblowers, that he was going to initiate a legal suit. Now, as a matter of fact, Cooper refused to debate me on the air when you were still broadcasting out of Las Vegas because of the suit that he had supposedly at that time in litigation. Now, we have never heard anything from anyone about any legal suit. Number one, Cooper knows he doesn't have a leg to stand on, and he also knows that everything that is in both of those stories can be substantiated. Now, there are too many points to go into on the condition of what Mr. Cooper is about, but let me preface it by saying, number one, I have never called Cooper a liar or a fraud per se. I have indicated it, and he's certainly borne that out, but I've never came out and stated, nor has the magazine, that Cooper is a liar and a fraud. Now, if anybody is interested, perhaps they could tell me, does anyone know at this point if Mr. Cooper has grown a beard?
Okay, are you finished now?
No, not quite.
Okay, just let me know, and then Bill is right there, and he can respond to everything you're saying.
Okay, because if he hasn't grown a beard yet, I guess we have to continue to call him a bald-faced liar, because the man would not know the truth if, in fact, it did come up and bite him on the derriere. Now, as far as any allegations about UFO Magazine being affiliated with the CIA, they could see the extent of the operation. That's the most laughable thing in the world. And I know what Cooper's going to say about his letters from Martin Cannon. We recently talked to Cannon, and he's absolutely, completely convinced that the whole thing was blown entirely out of proportion. Now, one other thing I want to make, and then I'm going to give Cooper a chance to start talking. Number one, I want to know how the investigation is coming on Cooper down in Cottonwood about the allegations that he slashed tires on Mr. Douglas Dean. Is Mr. Cooper willing to discuss the court restraining order that was placed on him by Mr. Dean? And is he also aware that not only has Mr. Dean given the life-threatening telephone calls that Cooper made to him, to the police down there, but also the actor Mr. Michael Callan here in Los Angeles has also put Mr. Cooper on record for making life-threatening phone calls.
Now, you may be wondering what I'm talking about. Remember, this was September 1990. Toward the end of July, Michael Callan and Douglas Dean, those two Hollywood professionals that had offered to do a contract with Cooper and package him to get the message out, and the very people that put together his extravaganza at the Showboat, one night received, each of them, a series of 5 life-threatening phone calls. The reason? Cooper was trying to extort from them the master tapes of all his presentations and his speeches that he had given. He had decided that because he had partners, he was losing a ton of money. He wanted all the money for himself. And regardless of the fact that he had signed contracts with Callan and Doug Dean, so at any rate, they get a series of absolutely drunken, threatening calls from Cooper, and I'm going to play a couple for you right here. The next morning, Cooper, who was living only a few miles from Douglas Dean in Arizona, had gone over to Dean's house, according to his gardener, because Dean had left in the middle of the night. At the time then, Dean was about 69, 70 years of age, living by himself, and he didn't want to be there when a drunken, bullying stormtrooper type like Cooper came storming over to his house. When he got home later that day, after Cooper had been there and left, and he found this out from his gardener, all 4 tires on one of his vehicles was slashed. But I'll let Doug Dean tell you about it. And let me caution you, there is some very strong language in this. So if you are offended by strong language, this might be a part of the show that you don't want to listen to.
In his weakest spot and be successful. And if you should not be successful, don't give up. Attack and attack and attack and attack and attack until he's laying bleeding on the ground and cannot ever get up again.
What you just heard is the voice of Milton William Cooper, Bill Cooper to his followers. My name is Douglas Dean, and I agree with his statement when you're confronted with an enemy who is all set to kill you. Survival, facing imminent death, is the name of the game. The trouble with Cooper's statement is that he believes everyone is his enemy. He trusts no one. Has stated this in his lectures, and his past record shows his continuous onslaught and attack against anyone who gets in his way. The list is long. Michael Callan and I made the mistake of trying to help Cooper get his message across in a big way where it would do the most good, instead of the nickel and dime operation he and his partner Stan Barrington were conducting. Promotion, the show business way, takes a lot of time, effort, and money. Cooper was all for it in the beginning, but his innate distrust through the 8 months of our association came to a head with his insistent demanding of all the master tapes of his lectures and interviews, which in reality never belonged to him, with the exception of tapes from 2 small lectures in Phoenix and Sedona, Arizona. Michael and I paid all the expenses to produce the rest of the tapes. Cooper and Barrington agreed at a meeting with Michael and myself at my home that we would not touch any of the monies taken in from the sale of the tapes, rolling over the account to take care of future expenses for larger orders of tapes until we had a sizable amount that we could start taking profit from after all the expenses were paid. The monies that I took in are still untouched in the Need to Know Productions account. Barrington still owes a sizable amount to that account from sales that he never turned in. Michael had 3 big lectures set up for Cooper, which he still doesn't know about. But Cooper's greed for the instant buck and demands for the master tapes gave Michael an uneasy feeling, which kept him from finalizing the deals that he was setting up. We are both more than happy that he didn't make those commitments. After a very poor turnout for his lecture at the San Diego Convention Center on May 26, 1990, Cooper's half-drunken firing of me was really a big laugh now that I look back on it. I didn't then, and never had worked for him. On the 28th of July, 1990, at 1:30 in the morning, Michael got a series of phone calls from Cooper over an hour's period. When the phone awakened him, all he said was, "Hello," and kept the message unit on record. The following are unedited copies of those calls from Cooper, which are on file with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Somebody done sold me your knees, and I'm coming to get them. I'm coming to get those knees, man. I'm gonna break them motherfuckers. I mean, 5 million fucking pieces.
Michael, you've reached 602-567-6536. This is Bill, your old partner, and I just wanted to let you know that John Hart, one of the richest men in America, has assigned me some bodyguards and some security personnel, and he's really looking out after my interest. And I knew that you were really concerned about that, and I thought that you might want to know that everything's really been taken care of, and he's going to make sure that nothing ever happens to me that's bad. So, you know, you got my number, you got my address, in case you get any hankering to, you know, talk about the old times. Just give me a call. Otherwise, I would suggest to be, you know, sort of careful. Don't ride any fucking Broncos. You know, since you've been hanging out with me, I wouldn't suggest that you go anywhere that you hadn't been before. I'd just suggest that you be real careful, especially since you've been hanging around with me, because, you know, who knows what the government's going to do to either one of us. But I guarantee you, ain't nobody ever going to hurt me and get away with it. I suggest you think about that. Take care, Mike. I love you. Annie sends her best wishes, and, you know, little Dorothy, she ain't talking yet, but she loves you too. And we're going to make sure that you amount to something. Even if it's a pile of horse shit. And you take care of yourself. We're going to be thinking about you all the time. And, you know, we'll call you in a couple of weeks just to see how you're doing. Take care, Michael. We miss you. I mean, we really miss you. And we're going to get you a real good present real soon.
Yeah, Bill Cooper jumping into the jug. Now, there are a number of other phone messages he left that night. Doug Dean ended up calling the sheriff's department. They took his call. They ended up coming out the next day. They investigated the slashed tires, and I will state for the record that they were never able to definitively pin that on Cooper. But Dean, as I said, was a man at the time, 69, 70 years of age. And I'm going to play just one last phone message that he left to show you truly what a despicable man this was. This is Cooper, by now really intoxicated, calling up Doug Dean sometime in the wee hours of the morning.
You dumb son of a bitch. If you don't straighten things out, you're the dumbest son of a bitch that ever lived. In fact, you may not even live.
So, what are you going to do with somebody like that? We refuse to be intimidated by this guy. Personally, on a personal level, I would have loved it if he would have confronted me somewhere. But the man knew better, because I would have gone off on him like a proverbial 4th of July fireworks display. But when he was at the other end of the phone, the guy was real brave, real tough. This is some more of that Goodman debate. The wee hours of September the 27th, 1990.
Because of the credibility factor.
I think the facts are that the reason that people
The man
wanted...
tell the truth or doesn't he? It's cut and dry.
Okay, but Don, I think with the mail that I received, I just want you to know what they wanted to know. They wanted to know if, in fact, you were telling the truth in the magazine or Bill Cooper's
Well, if
telling
I'm not telling the truth, and it's very simple, Cooper can sue me,
Right.
and we'll go to court.
That's what a lot of mail also. Bill, are you in the process of suing them?
Well, if you'd gotten my newsletter number 6, you would have seen that because of what UFO Magazine has done, I now have more speaking engagements than I've ever had in my life.
Well, that's a nice
Issue
job,
number
Al.
6, I encourage Vicki Cooper and Don Ecker to continue, because now people who never heard my name before want me to come and talk in their town.
Now, that's my point, Billy.
But that's
you were
not the...
still in Las Vegas, and I tried to go on head-to-head with Mr. Cooper, and he stated that he already had a legal suit filed.
Right.
Now, I rest my case.
Wait a minute. I called Billy Goodman back and told him that I would be willing to go on with you that Saturday.
That's right.
Billy said that you were then not willing.
Well, then he didn't tell you the truth, because I tried to call him 3 times that week to find out.
Hold it. I never said he was not willing. I never said that, Bill Cooper.
Well,
No, I never said he was not.
misunderstood you.
Yeah,
I
no.
called you back and
I never. I said I would see what would happen. I was supposed to hear from him, and I guess he never reached me. And
Maybe that's what it was.
Well, I was in the process of moving into the network situation. But anyway, getting.
Oh, yeah. So.
He or did he not belong on a...
So. Show didn't last much longer that night. Of course, nothing was really accomplished. And soon thereafter, Cooper moved out of the UFO field and went strictly into the Patriot movement. For a while, he had a shortwave broadcast called The Hour of the Time. Some wag coined it the Hour of the Slime. But be that as it may, Cooper had a rather mixed review in all circles across the United States. While he was still living in Long Beach police came out on a number of domestic dispute calls. I really felt sorry for the woman he was married to at the time. He had married a Chinese woman, brought her over here, and I had met her one time very briefly back in 1988. And Cooper would get liquored up, and whatever demons he was fighting, whether it was the demons in a bottle or the demons in his head, he would take it out on this woman. She eventually left him. By 2000, he was living down in Ecker, Arizona, and several warrants were out after him. Now, Cooper had a website, and he used to have periodic updates up there on the government coming to get him. And he claimed that he would meet any government agent or police officer with armed resistance. Now, remember, this was a few short years after the debacle at Waco, Texas, under Janet Reno, with the mass killing of over 80, almost 100 people at the Branch Davidian compound. And undoubtedly, the feds were fearful that another showdown like that would end up in another major shootout. But the warrants that Cooper had at that time hanging over his head included tax evasion, included bank defrauding, and the guy was just, quite frankly, a rather unpleasant character to be around. Just before he was killed in the shootout with police, a man had been driving by Cooper's property. Apparently, he either pulled into the property to turn around or something, but Cooper came storming out of his house, jumped in his vehicle, chased this man down, forced him off the road, and pulled him out of his car at gunpoint. The man happened to be a local medical doctor, an MD. As soon as he was able to get out of there, he contacted the police. The sheriff's department knew who Cooper was, and they knew that he had a reputation for being just a little dangerous. So that night, they came out, a SWAT team, surrounded his house. Then a couple of deputies jumped in a pickup truck like a couple of teenagers and were running around on his property, and Cooper heard them and came storming out. Jumped in his vehicle, went chasing down there after them. He was armed. They identified themselves as police officers and told him he was under arrest. He jumped back in his car, shot back up to his house. One officer jumped out in front of him, and he almost ran him down. The man was only able to get away by jumping out of the way. And upon getting to his house, he jumped out of his car. Another police officer popped out, screamed at him to halt. Cooper fired his weapon, striking this policeman in the head. The man was a Desert Shield veteran, a former Marine. And the last I heard, he was still in very bad shape, although thank God he didn't die. The police immediately returned fire. Cooper was killed. Should have been the end of the story. Unfortunately, it's not. There are still people out there that think that Bill Cooper was the real deal. I wrote an obituary for him for UFO magazine. As a matter of fact, I also wrote one for the 14 Times in the United Kingdom. The sad fact of the story was Cooper was a deeply disturbed man that saw everybody as an enemy. He also thought that he had found his way to financial security by hawking one of the most extraordinary conspiracy theories in the world around the web and around the world. Unfortunately, there are still people out there today that think that Bill Cooper was onto something. Well, my final word on it, the only thing Bill Cooper was on was a fifth of Chivas Regal. Hey, sad story. And there will be those people that probably go to their grave thinking he was the real deal. That's it for this edition of Dark Matters Radio. My name is Don Ecker. I'm your host, and soon we're going to be coming at you live. I'm going to have more word on that as things develop. So in the meantime, keep looking up, keep your eyes to the skies, and we'll see you on the next edition of Dark Matters Radio, heard right here on the Patriot Brigade Radio Network.